So, I have something to admit. I feel like I've led you all astray. All of us here at JNix does magic and stuff. Me only. I went to a pre-release. And I didn't even come close to winning. All that excitement, all that talk, just right down the drain. So upset I can't even issue a good apology to each and every one of you that are watching and have watched my videos. Anyways, so I went 1-1-1 in the Aetherdrift Prerelease. Not exactly my best performance. Not exactly how I expected it to go. So, yeah, maybe it's my fault. Maybe I could have went 2-1. I should have went 2-1. I don't think I could have pulled the third game. Just wanted to kind of give everybody a little bit of a rundown on my thoughts and ideas on what I ended up doing with my pre-release box. Maybe this is something you're interested in. Maybe it's something that you're not necessarily interested in. But I'm going to give it a go and see. And worst case, I never do this again. So, first off, I opened up my pre-release box. I got my promo. I opened up all 6 of my packs. I laid them out in basically by color. And then I went through and I looked and I said, all right, what ones do I have the most of? And I saw I had a ton of black. I had a ton of blue. I had a ton of green and decent amount of red and almost no white in my pre-release pack. So I went and immediately went, ooh, I really like the red cards. Let's see what we got here. But I went through and I looked and I'm like, there's not really a mechanic that lines up. There's a couple discard things. There's a couple pump things. 1 or 2 exhaust spells that don't do enough for me to really dip into there. There weren't any of those big finishers that we had talked about in one of my previous videos talking about the lead-in to pre-release. So I then went, all right, well, red-green's out. Uh-oh, what am I going to do now? So I went and I looked at my multicolored, and I saw I had a decent amount in black-blue and a decent amount in black-green. So I looked at the black-green. I was like, ooh, we have a little bit of a discard graveyard synergy thing going on here. This could be possible. And then I looked at the black-blue, and I'm like, there's a little bit of, looking at both of the piles, there's a lot of removal stuff in black, but there's also a lot of removal or stun or lockdown type of things in blue. I'm not sure I'm going to have enough creatures to get across the line. And I didn't have any of those nice blue vehicles like Possession Engine. Sorry, I was thinking Repossession Engine, but it's just the first time. Possession Engine, and I was like, oh shoot. So after opening up my promo, I said, hey, black-green, I think this is where we're going. I looked through. Green had a couple things that could mill stuff to the bin. Black had a couple things that could bring stuff out of the bin, could put stuff in it, and do some interesting little mechanics within that. So, without further ado, and annoying you with any more of this extended intro and conversation on what I did with my pre-release kit, which everybody else did, let's get into the cards that really kind of made my deck. Here's the first guy that ended up actually making my deck work for me, and this was my pre-release promo card. So basically, when my creature here enters the battlefield, Create 1/1 green insect creature token for each artifact and or creature I have in my graveyard. Whenever another insect you control dies, put +1/+1 counter on this dude, and each opponent loses 1 life. Neat. So this card really came into clutch in my second game. It kind of gave me a board state that I could attack with because I had much wider creatures, so I could knock a little bit off of the life of my opponent. And then in addition to that, it also gave me something that I could defend with, because at this state I didn't fully turn the game around yet in game 1 on my second match. So worked out fantastic. I kept milling things into my graveyard, and basically everything was an artifact or a creature except for 1 or 2 removal type things. So I ended up getting, I want to say, 9 insect creatures. I swung in with 6 of them, 5 of them the next round. 5 of them died. I put a +1/+1 counter, 5 of them on this, and then my opponent lost 5 life right there. And then my opponent proceeded to board wipe, not necessarily board wipe, but kill my insect creatures and this dude. So it didn't last long, but it gave me just enough push that I needed. I wish I really got a chance to utilize this ability a little bit more, but in my first matchup, like I said and mentioned in the intro, I was having trouble getting those cards in the bin and doing something with them. And then in my third matchup, I think my deck was, and I feel bad saying this, but it was shuffled finally enough that I didn't have pockets of lands. So when I was drawing cards, I was drawing the stuff that I needed in turn. So it worked out perfectly for me. But this card kind of came in clutch in that second game. So another card that was very fun to use was this guy. The 5/4 costs 1 less to cast for each creature or artifact in your graveyard, and I could cycle it. Anytime I cast this guy, I was casting him for 1 for a black, right? Incredible value. Just paying 1 cost, getting this dude on the board in turn 3, and then having a 5/4 really kind of took over the game and created a threat. Now, it didn't stick around long, because, I mean, 5/4 on turn 3 or turn 4 was very oppressive. So everything went towards making sure this guy died. But when it was on the board, it did the job for me. So next card I want to talk about, this one was incredible for me. It is Streaking Oil Gorger, 4 and a black, flying haste, start your engines, max speed, it gains lifelink. I was usually getting this out basically the turn after I was hitting max speed for my last 2 games, because my first game I didn't really end up getting max speed there. So he was generating a ton of life for me with that lifelink. And yes, it's only a 3, but the fact that I was able to get in, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 times at least with this guy, especially with a combat trick that we'll talk about in the future, it was so clutch for me. This guy actually shifted my game 2 around. My opponent had 32 life at one point, dropped down to 20, then made their way back up to 34 life. And then by that time I had an answer for their lifelink. This guy came on the board and became my answer to them gaining life. So I just outpaced them and started beating down, turning cards sideways. Great card. I love playing it. Next one that there's a lot to talk about, Curse Cloth Wrappings. So it's Zombie Lord artifact, right? And then tap, and target creature card in your graveyard gains Embalm, and Embalm cost is the mana cost of the card. This I ended up triggering, I don't know, probably 5 times. So I was pulling stuff out of my graveyard at +1/+1, and ended up making a lot of things that my opponents were like, good, I killed it. Oh, hey, guess what, buddy? It's back. This was so good in my match 2 and 3. I can't recommend this highly enough in the sealed play that I did, and in limited too, when you're doing drafts. Then Grim Bauble, it's just great card, right? Artifact, -2/-2 on target opponent creature, and then sacrifice it and surveil 2. Once again, fed right into my thing of, hey, I have a little bit of removal for the opponent. I get to surveil, I get to dump artifacts and creatures into my bin. Now this guy was great. This is how I actually dealt with a Death Toucher that one of my opponents had. A little combat trick. They come in, they swing, I block, they go, alright, let's go to damage. I'm like, I actually have something to do. Maximum overdrive, and then they played the +4/+4 trample on their creature. They ended up just dealing a little bit of damage to me with the trample effect, but I ended up killing their creature and keeping mine. So in the end, I made out. It was a great card when I was able to play it for 2. Next one was Paxdal Terror. This one was just fun just to get on the battlefield, and I didn't even have to really swing with it. I'm just casting other things, and I'm just pinging my opponent, and I'm just gaining more life. Game 3, this card actually came in handy. Well, match 3, the card came in handy on the first game. I had trouble getting literally the last life of my opponent down, and they had built up a little bit of a board state. Had this card in hand, played it, played another card, finished my opponent off. I was lucky to have it, and yeah, it's definitely kind of cool because it gives you that Blood Artist, that Soulport Cutthroat, the Vengeful Blood Witch style effect for you in that type of situation, but it's an enters effect rather than anything else. Then this card, this card, beautiful card. You may cast this card from your graveyard by paying 2 life, sacrificing an artifact or creature, and in addition to paying its other costs, right? So I actually brought this card back 3 times from the graveyard, which kind of seems insane for the thing that I'm actually giving up. But there were situations where I had like a 1 or 2 drop creature that wasn't going to really do anything for me, or I needed them to get in, kind of like, what is it, District Mascot. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do anything with them, but I did have them in my deck. I actually sacrificed them, paid 2 life, then paid the 4 to get this guy from the graveyard back on the battlefield. Another one of those fun instances where it's like my opponent is like, yes, I took care of it. No, sorry buddy, we're back at it again. Bestow Greatness. This was the card that I was talking about my opponent used in one situation, and I ended up using this on that Oil Gorger, where target creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample until the end of turn. Ooh, mwah! Beautiful. I love it. I love it. Gained me so much life on that single turn. I took care of 2 creatures that my opponent tried to double block with, and they played a combat trick themselves. I forget exactly which one it was. And I got through, got damage, and I gained life. Yes, this card, I didn't end up seeing it too much throughout my 3 matchups, but when I did see it, it was it. It was the card. Hazard of the Dunes. Not really anything special about this card, and I didn't even end up exhausting it ever, but what it was in there for was that reach. With it being a 4/4, if I could get it on the battlefield, it had enough that it changed the game at a lot of points for me, where my opponent has some flyers, all of a sudden I have a 4/4 that can reach. I didn't have really any flyers in my deck, so I needed something to deal with that, and this was my solution to dealing with flyers. Then another great card, I actually sacrificed this to that Wicker Folk that I talked about like 2 cards ago, Molt Tender. Green, you can tap it, mill a card. Great, I want cards in my graveyard. I don't care. And and then tap it, exile a card from your graveyard, add one of any color. I never used the second ability because having cards in my graveyard was so much more valuable than getting one additional mana out. But I did use that mill ability a few times just to try and get my hand where I needed it to be to make it an effective board state when the cards actually were played. Then Point the Way. I played this in my first matchup and I wasn't able to get the start your engines up and running enough to make a benefit out of it, which I understand is the downside of it. But in my third game, my third matchup, I played Point the Way. I ended up getting to max speed. I pulled 4 basics out of my library. It was so good. All of a sudden, I was 4 whole turns way ahead of my opponent. And then from there, it was just about a wrap. It was pretty oppressive when you could get it to go off. Diving back into that mill idea, Pothole Mole. I ended up playing this card, I think in half of the games that I played, and every single time I was able to get a land out of my graveyard, whether it was already there or I got it off of the mill. And then on top of that, once again, putting more creatures and artifacts in my graveyard, make my creatures bigger. Amazing for what I had going on. Broodheart Engine. At the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1. That was great. Most of the time I was putting it in the bin because it wasn't the thing that I needed. And I knew what I had, so I had to dig down for it. But I was helping everything else out. Once again, putting things in my graveyard. Love it. Then its second ability, sacrifice this artifact, return target creature or vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield. I used this on the Oil Gorger. I was a bad man. Oh, it was so nice to do. Yeah. Great card. Paid off in both situations. Then, I said I was black-green. I actually splashed for a third color. And this is probably one of the only cards that I'd really splash for. There were a few other ones. Don't let me lie to you. There were a few other ones, but if I was going to splash, this was it. Unstoppable Plan. So at the beginning of your end step, untap all non-land permanents you control. I played this in my first matchup and in my third matchup. My third matchup, oh, it was disgusting. In my first matchup, once again, I was drawing lands and I was drawing small removal, nothing to block creatures with. So it didn't really help in my first matchup. But in the third, let me tell you, what a card. Also, besides any Verges that I pulled, this was the most expensive card out of my pre-release set. Can you believe that? So now we're into the lands. Avishkar Raceway. I used the max speed ability. This is what I'm really talking about. The max speed ability 2 times, and it did enough that I didn't feel like I was wasting it. It did feel kind of bad that I was at the point that I needed to use that ability, but it did just enough for me. Where I was missing a land and I needed one, it got out. Where I needed a creature to do something big and change the tide of war, basically, and I would discard and I would get something that would get me there or almost there. Great card. Next, Soul Ring. Moraganda Raceway. Max speed, you tap it for 2 colorless. I got this card out basically every single game, and I got to utilize that additional 2 colorless so many times. It was such a good card to play. It was such a good card to play in limited and, well, sealed. But I think it's going to be a great card to play in draft, and I think it's going to be a great card to possibly do something crazy in standard. If somebody can get a Start Your Engines deck, it's going to do something. And then finally, I talked about it a little bit, the Verge. I pulled 2 Verges out of my pre-release, and one of them happened to have an island on it so I could splash, and then a forest on it so I felt comfortable. So that was my pre-release experience. Tell me, did you do a pre-release? Have you done a Friday Night Magic or a draft? Have you played it maybe with your friends? Let me know what you think about this set. Let me know how your deck panned out. And, let's start some conversation, because it was actually a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I think there were a lot of people there that were ready to hate playing Aetherdrift that really enjoyed what ended up coming out of the whole pre-release itself. So, yeah, let me know. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. Don't forget, whether you liked or disliked what you heard in this video you just watched, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on the video on YouTube. I am going to be doing some live streams every Saturday, if possible, on YouTube and Twitch. There will also be recordings that are released throughout the week, so keep an eye out for both of those things. And once again, thank you so much. Thank you so much.